Greetings once again from beautiful Funk Studios in Fargo, North Dakota, deep within the depths of the Supercharger Dead Zone. This is the Tesla News and Topics podcast for November 13th, 2018.
I think we've got quite a lot of good news to talk about, and look forward to sharing that with you.
Hello, everyone. This is Jeff. I am back. I did take a little bit of a break here, a couple weeks off. I just ended up having a really crazy schedule. And also, I sort of noticed that having a Tesla, having a Model 3 now, I sort of get my Tesla fix a little bit every day. And so, I find that I'm not paying quite as close attention to the news as I did before. I'm still keeping up, obviously, with everything, but I don't have that crazy, obsessive compulsion to like keep track of everything and be on Twitter quite as much. So I did get my Tesla fix, but apologies for missing a couple weeks here. I've got three news articles I wanted to cover, and then today's topic, which I kind of debated which title to go with. I think option A is the good, bad, and ugly of owning a Tesla in cold weather climates. The subtitle to that, or the alternate title to it, is when 310 equals 190, and we'll come back to that. The first article is a pretty clever use of autopilot here. I found this actually on a website called boingboing.net. There'll be a link to it in the show notes, basically titled, "Man Uses His Tesla Summon to Avoid Parking Tickets." And it's a pretty cool use of Summon. Basically, the guy outside of his office building, they show him up a couple floors at a window where he can see his Model 3. It looks like it's a Model 3 parked in what essentially is 2-hour parking. And he's just using Summon to back up into another available spot. And I guess every 2 hours, he's going to this spot in the office where he can see his car, and he's backing it up into an empty spot and then moving it forward into an empty spot when it's available, and just kind of back and forth and using that to avoid a parking ticket. I thought that was pretty clever. Great example of what makes Tesla special, and that there's really no other vehicle right now that you could do something like that. So I thought that was pretty cool. The second article is from ArsTechnica.com. This references a tweet, a group of tweets that Elon Musk sent out about enhancements to Summon as well, where he said that basically it'll have an option where you can put Summon, and it'll basically be in like follow mode. And he said that it would, quote, follow you like a pet. And walk around. And he has mentioned in the past, before, that eventually Summon will get to a point where you could be across the country, you could be in another state, you could be across town, you could be standing in your own driveway and hit Summon, and the car will find you. It'll, geolocate you, and it will somehow find you. So when it reaches that level of autonomy, it really doesn't matter how far away you are, especially when they are able to figure out the automated, robot snake chargers for superchargers. So if it's a good distance away, it should still, in theory, be eventually able to find you. Now, obviously, you'd have to plan ahead. If you want your car to pick you up across town, you might have to, summon your car a half hour or hour early. If you're in another state or someone borrowed it and they want to send it back to you, I guess you could summon it back to yourself. You could have your, if you're sharing the vehicle with your significant other and your spouse, whatever, they could take it to work, and then you could call it back to you, and then you could have the car, and they could also call it back if they needed it during the day to go to lunch. So I think it opens up a lot of possibilities for people to perhaps get by with just one vehicle that previously needed two. Obviously, be pretty dependent on that one vehicle, so it'd have to be pretty reliable. But pretty neat an enhancement and potential future use of Summon. The third article is from Bloomberg, and this is a reference to Waymo. So Google has had their own self-driving project, which was a spin-off of Google, eventually named Waymo. And they're going to be starting driverless flights. I believe the project is in Phoenix, Arizona, where they've been doing all the testing. And it's a relatively geofenced area. I think it's like 110 square miles or something like that. And they will basically be offering, a self-driving option to Uber and Phoenix. So you'll be able to do that. It sounds like they're going to be starting in limited fashion in December and then rolling forward there. So that's interesting in that they're essentially going to be the first to market, unless Tesla somehow comes out with something between now and then. They'll be the first to market with a commercial product that is self-driving. Now, they're doing a very different approach than what Tesla has been doing, which is trying to get to a vision based system that will work anywhere in all conditions. And Waymo has taken a vision radar LiDAR system strapped onto a big van. I think it's a Chrysler Pacifica. And trying to work in a very defined area, which I think makes sense. It simplifies the problem. Tesla, though, it sounds like they're going more for the whole shebang. They're trying to get to an all-inclusive system that by using vision can operate in any environment just like humans currently do. So that's interesting news, and I'll kind of check back with that and see where we're at. Tesla did just release version 9, which I'll get to a little bit in the topic for today, but does get a little bit closer to autonomous driving, particularly on the highway, but still, at least in my opinion, a ways to go. All right, so let's move on to the topic for this episode here. Again, as I mentioned up top, you can pick your title here, The Good, Bad, and Ugly of Owning a Tesla in Cold Weather Climate, or alternative title, When 310 Equals 190. And you may, if you recognize that number 310, you may kind of know where I'm going here. First, I want to start with the good. I don't want anyone to get the impression that I'm not happy with my purchase, or that I'm, down on Tesla at this point. I'm not, but I am going to speak very frankly about some issues that I, encountered, and some things that kind of really, really bothered me, and were, really at this point, the only significant, disappointment that I would say related to the Tesla. But let's start with the good stuff first. The update to version 9 is cool. I like the new apps. The navigate on autopilot, or drive on navigation, whatever it is okay. It doesn't really add that much, in that you still, basically what it does is, if it knows your destination and you're driving on the interstate and you have a set sort of speed limit, it will suggest lane changes to get you there faster. If the car in front of you is slow, it'll say, I think you should move to the left lane. You have to acknowledge that, and then the car will make the lane change. It does that very well. Version 9 is a little more ping-ponging back and forth in the lane, not quite as solid as the previous version, but still very good. So very happy with that, huge plus. Probably my favorite thing about the car, one of my favorite, I don't know if I could pick one, but I love autopilot. When I go to work, I have a nice stretch there where, as long as I'm paying attention to traffic lights, I put it on autopilot. It works great. It makes it very comfortable. The ride is smooth. The audio system that comes with it is fantastic. By far the best car audio experience that I've had. Traction control on ice and snow is great. I'm just using all-season tires. I haven't yet decided whether I'm going to go with winter tires or not. I'm going to try to see how it goes. I've got a backup vehicle if things get pretty deep, but it works great. Also, in cold weather climates, you need to preheat your car. A lot of people will spend, a few $100, maybe $500 or $600 on a system to start your car remotely. And these work pretty well. There are obviously a couple of big downsides. One, with the existing systems, the one that I have, it's a radio frequency transmitter, and you have to be within a certain range. If you're behind a thick wall or something, it won't work. So during a shift, if I wanted to start my car in the dead of winter, I'd try to get out, close enough. I'd have to walk out either in the garage or someplace, hit the button, give it about 20 minutes, and then come out. My car is running and is warm. The downside is, I'm using fuel and I'm creating emissions that really don't need. The Tesla's great about that. It heats up very quickly, though. So I have found so far that preheating it is not that important, because the car warms up so fast once I get in it. That's really just a minute or two. But if it's really cold, I have been trying to remember to start it, and absolutely love that. That's an essential thing in cold weather. In other car manufacturers, that would be an add-on purchase or an additional thing. And that just kind of comes with Tesla. So, wonderful, great add-on. Overall, still very, very happy with the car. But we do need to get to some issues that I had. So as far as the bad and the ugly, I'm just going to group those two together. I learned this sort of, I guess, really the hard way. I took a road trip. I took my second oldest son, Trevor, and we took a road trip to Minneapolis. So I'm in Fargo, North Dakota, and we went southeast to Minneapolis, Minnesota. So just to give yourselves an idea of what kind of distances we're talking about, Fargo to our destination, we actually went to the Minnesota Science Museum. My son Trevor's kind of into aviation, and they had a cool IMAX movie there called Life in the Age of Airplanes, which was awesome. Any of you who are in the area, Minnesota Tesla users group, those sorts of folks, I would highly recommend the film if you're at all interested in aviation. Excellent film, narrated by Harrison Ford. So really, really good job with that. So that was our first destination. That distance was about 215, so 215 miles. From our initial destination or from Fargo to our first destination. Now, the nearest supercharger ended up being 187.8 miles to the nearest supercharger, which is in Clearwater, Minnesota. You've heard me talk about this before if you've listened to the show previously. So I wasn't sure how this was going to go, so I made sure that my battery was charged to 100%. This is the first time that I have charged the battery all the way up to 100%. I'm thinking I've got 310 miles of rated range on the vehicle, and that's more than enough. We'll easily make it the 188 miles. We'll just round it up. We'll call it 190 or so to the supercharger. So we head out. We're 100% charged. We get out there. We plug in the destination, and immediately it's saying that we'll arrive in Clearwater with about 8% charge left on the battery. So I'm still thinking that's not too bad. We'll make it, but what if I hadn't charged all the way up to 100%? I thought that we can always drive a little slower or whatnot. It turns out we were kind of into a headwind. I don't know exactly the wind. We did measure it on the way back, but we didn't actually measure the wind, but it was very windy that day. It was actually 14 degrees when we left in the morning, and it was 18 degrees. This is Fahrenheit by the time we reached the supercharger, so that's significantly below freezing. Our average speed for the trip was about 65 miles an hour. Low as 60 and as high as maybe 75. And so what that means is the speed limit actually in the area where we are is basically 70. So you could easily go, that the speed limit on the initial section for the North Dakota side is a little higher. So we'll just call it 70 the rest of the way. So we ended up using 67 kilowatts. So from what I understand, the Model 3 battery is a 74 kilowatt battery. So we used almost all of it and ended up getting 358 kilowatts per mile. So by the time we got there, we left with 100% and arrived in Clearwater with 8%. So roughly doing the math, 310 equals a little over 190. Maybe you call it 200, but that amounts to a 33% range hit. When we did get there, we plugged in, we stopped and had lunch, and that went pretty smoothly. When we first plugged in, we reached charging rates as high as 430 miles per hour of charging. So that part was great. So we had lunch. We didn't really have to drag our feet too much. And then left, basically at about probably 90%. The rest of the way was only about 64 miles. And so the rest of it was fine. We went to our destination. We kind of had some fun, goofed around, ended up staying at a hotel near the Mall of America where they had Tesla destination charging. So we plugged in the car that night. And then basically left the next morning for Clearwater, again with 100%. I charged the battery all the way up to 100%, left with a nice warm car because it had been plugged in all night. Now, this particular hotel is the Fairfield Inn and Suites next to the Mall of America. They had many electric charging spots. I think they had 8 Tesla destination chargers. When we arrived, there was no one in any of those spots, and we took one of them. Interestingly, when we left in the morning, 6 of those spots were full, but it was basically us and then 5 ICE cars just also parked there. Now, there was still an open spot or two, so it's not like they prevented someone from charging, but it was basically full of regular cars by the time we left in the morning. They also had a bunch of the J1776, the other. So they had like a place for Leafs to plug in on the other side of the parking lot, and they had another like 5 or 6 spots there. So really good access to charging at the hotel. I have heard some stories where people arrive at busy hotels and there's so many Teslas that they actually can't all plug in during the night, and we really were counting on that. So the next morning we left, and it was only about 65, 70 miles back to Clearwater. So we drove, plenty fast, didn't have to worry about it, probably averaged about 75 miles an hour. And no issues whatsoever. Got to Clearwater and stopped. We arrived there at about, I want to say 75% charge, and then plugged in. And it took us about 45 minutes to go from 75% all the way back up to 100%. Actually, I think we left with probably closer to like 96%, just because, the projections were that we were still going to make it. And then, we decided to head out. So on the return trip, it was basically more of the same. It was a little bit worse heading back. On the way back, we had a 12-mile-an-hour headwind that we were driving directly into. The wind was coming from the northwest, and that's the direction we were heading from Minneapolis. So we had a headwind. It was a little bit warmer. It was 30 degrees. And so I thought, well, maybe these things will offset. We'll make it on time. But basically, the trip back was pretty stressful. There's several annoying things that happen in the Tesla. And again, I love my Tesla, but these things drove me crazy. As you get going, it says you'll arrive with 11% battery. And then 5 minutes into the trip, it says you'll arrive with 9% battery. And then 10 minutes into the trip, it says now you're looking at 7, and so on and so on. So the next thing you know, it's saying you won't make it to your destination unless you drive slower. So we're trying to drive the speed limit, which is 70 miles an hour. At one point, we slowed down to 65, then to 64, then to 63. And then as we're getting closer to town and we're getting into the yellow on the battery, now we're down to 60. So we're in this unbelievably fast electric car, and we're driving 60 miles an hour, being passed left and right by people that, probably left, well after we did. They didn't have to stop at the supercharger, and they can drive as fast as they want to because they can get gas wherever they like. So that kind of sucked. So it ends up being a longer drive. You end up having to stop longer. Now, we didn't plan it out right. We wanted to go to this really cool breakfast restaurant in Minneapolis called Hot Plate. If you're in the area and you don't already know about it, it's awesome. So we wanted to go out for breakfast. What we should have done, though, is skip that, got on the road, got to Clearwater, had breakfast in Clearwater, and at least that waiting time wouldn't have been so bad. But we didn't, that was probably my fault. We didn't plan it out right. The breakfast was still worth it, but it ended up, adding 45 minutes or so to our trip, where if we were in a gas car, we would have stopped, got some gas, grabbed some snacks, go to the bathroom, and we've been out of there in 5-10 minutes. So the drive takes longer, the stops are longer, you lose regenerative braking, and so you take an additional battery hit when it's cold because you don't get any regenerative braking. The arrival estimates continue to evolve, and then the lack of superchargers is just a double whammy. You have this cold weather hit. We're in a low population area. Tesla's been promising superchargers. They've now have permits. These permits, I won't do a formal supercharger update, a dead zone update. I'll do it in the next podcast. But suffice to say, nothing's changed there. They're still showing a dot in Alexandria, Minnesota, which would be a good location. It's about 80 miles from the other supercharger. So basically, you'd have the first stretch from Fargo would be 100 miles. The next step would be 85, and the next one would be 64, 65 into the cities. So that last stretch, 100, would be the longest stretch you have to make. That still might be a little dicey depending on how much you want to wait. The fact that Tesla has been saying these superchargers are coming, and it's been literally years. These permits, last time I checked, I think they're at 273 days. The supercharger in Alexandria is getting closer. It's going to be at a Target, which is a little ways off the highway, but there's nothing happening. I don't expect anything to really show up until the spring. The ZEF Energy Network, I think it's called ZEF Energy. There's like an independent consortium I've mentioned before that are kind of trying to cover Minnesota and Wisconsin, and these will be DC fast chargers. I'm not sure what the speed is. I'm not sure what the cost is, but they're planning to cover that stretch quite a bit better than Tesla is. There's going to be a spot in Fergus Falls, which is about 45 minutes out. The next one would be Alexandria, so basically every 50 to 60 miles, there's going to be something. They're going to cover St. Cloud. So between Tesla and between the ZEF Energy Network, that corridor is going to be covered pretty nicely. But currently, it's not covered very well at all. In fact, the road trip on the way back, so we continue to drive. We're now driving 60 miles an hour for the last 40 minutes of the trip. My son's taking a nap. And I'm kind of sweating it out a little bit. I'm trying to look at, where in Moorhead, Minnesota, which is the sister city to Fargo where we live, is there a place that I could stop and charge even if I just need to get like 5 miles, and how long will that take? Am I looking at having to stop, 12 miles from my house because I'm out of range and I have to stop for a half an hour? Luckily, that ended up not happening. I made it home with about 3% on the battery, and that was with all of these adjustments, with having to slow down, with having the extra stop. So at least for now, particularly in cold climate, a road trip in a Tesla in the supercharger dead zone in the Midwest is far from what it needs to be. It's particularly frustrating because one of the greatest features is the highway driving is autopilot. Driving on the interstate on autopilot is awesome, but I don't want it to add, an hour and a half or longer to my road trip. So as soon as they get these extra superchargers in, and I understand I probably just need to be patient and maybe not complain so much, but I was not even going to mention to my wife how dicey things were getting because I knew she'd be probably even more down on Tesla, and I just didn't want her to know about it. So, we walked in, and I plugged in the car basically immediately as soon as we got home, and she's like, "How'd it go?" And I said, it was fine. I mean, we made it. I said things got a little bit tight there, and she's like, "I know." And as it turns out, she was on the Tesla app on hers, which is linked to my car. And she was basically, checking in every now and then just to see how our progress was going. So I didn't know this, but the Tesla app, when you pull it up the vehicle location, when the car is driving, it shows your location on the map. It shows your speed. And it also shows you can access the battery state through the charging part of it. So she was watching and saw how bad things were getting and was getting a little bit nervous. So as it turns out, she already knew about it and was kind of watching. I wouldn't say she was spying on us, but I think she just wanted, just having the ability to check on where we were, I think was helpful, just so she'd know when we were going to get home and that sort of thing. But so she knew, and, she's like, "Well, were you going to tell me how bad it got?" And I said, actually, I wasn't going to tell you how bad it got because I didn't want you to be nervous in the future about us taking a road trip. But really, until they get these superchargers, she won't go, and I don't blame her. I mean, this was a little too close for comfort. So Tesla needs to fix this. I've covered it before. They have been promising that they're going to get this covered. I know we're low on the priority list, but it's really was disappointing. The drive itself, I enjoyed spending time with my son. The car was great otherwise, but please, 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 just fix this. Get the supercharger network fleshed out, for the love of Pete. So thanks again for listening. If any of you out there have similar experiences or have any advice or anything else that might help me with this particular issue, please let me know. You can find us on email at teslanewstopics@gmail.com. Also, you could reach out on Twitter at Tesla News Topics. Music for the show is provided by Melodious Thunk. I do have a referral code if anyone's interested. It's ts.la/Jeff, Jeff, 62003. If anyone is been listening or trying to listen on TuneIn, please let me know when this shows up. It's been submitted and I got a confirmation, but I haven't been able to find it myself. Also, if you feel like supporting the show financially in any way, I'd appreciate it. Patreon.com/Tesla News Topics. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes. Leave a positive review if you feel so inclined. Thank you for listening. I will talk to you next time. Have a great week.